Well, hello everyone, and welcome to KPMG's Reframing Sustainability panel, Building Resilience and Driving Growth. I'm Richard Andrews. I head sustainability for KPMG in the UK, and we've been running our Reframing Sustainability campaign over the last year. And I'm really looking forward to exploring this theme further today as part of our headline sponsorship of Reset Connects London. I have some wonderful panelists with me who will introduce themselves in a moment. Sarah Mukherjee, MEE, CEO of the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals, or ISEP. Tom Crawford, Global Head of Sustainability at Vodafone Group. And Alicia Kederinsky, Head of the Sustainable Finance Department and co-lead of Defence, Security and Resilience at the Financial Conduct Authority, which is a bit of a mouthful. We'll hear more about that in a moment. But before we hear from our speakers and panelists, why do we need to reframe sustainability? Well, in a constantly changing world, how we recognize and articulate the value in sustainability needs to change. Last year, we observed that perhaps an overemphasis on regulatory demands had in some cases overshadowed the strategic advantages of sustainability can bring. The commercial value, if you like, and bottom line impact. So we looked at reframing the conversation to look at that tangible bottom line benefit that sustainability led approaches can bring. 12 months later, more than ever, we are seeing an increased need for resilience to address shocks to the business as we weather. I think the word polycrisis is probably overdone, but we see more and more shocks more frequently and longer lasting. So forward-looking organizations are starting to reframe their thinking and adopt sustainability-driven solutions. Those that are needed to provide business resilience, for instance, across energy, water, social resilience, human capital. And they're starting to see this increasingly as a driver for value, innovation, and growth, ultimately for competitive advantage. And we're seeing different types of resilience. Enterprise resilience, financial, which includes financial resilience, whether the organization has got the financial capital to weather the storm. Operational resilience, maintaining products and service delivery during disruption. And increasingly, that includes climate resilience, the impacts of energy, water, supply chains, agriculture. I could go on. And commercial and strategic resilience, adapting to market changes and threats such as AI and cyber. And we might hear a bit more on that from our panel as well. And there's also an emerging area which we call societal resilience. So what is the role of private enterprise in supporting broader societal and community resilience, particularly during times of shock or change? Now, this isn't just about value protection or about risk. It's also about the opportunity for growth, ranging from AI-driven decarbonisation to bold new business models. So there's some really real opportunities there, and they're here right now. So it's time to reframe the conversation. But let's first hear an introduction from each of our panelists today. Sarah, can I turn to you first?
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. And thank you. Gosh, I feel like I'm on my Broadway debut with Lights in My Eyes. So forgive me if I'm not looking all the way around the room. So, as Richard said, I'm Sarah Mukherjee, Chief Executive of the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals. And I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of these subjects as we go through the discussion. But I'd like to bring to the table three things. And the first is we are in danger of letting the long term be the enemy of, or the short term be the enemy of the long term. Chris Huhne, who some might remember if you were following politics in the 90s, as the at one point climate change secretary, who ended up in jail for various reasons. He used a phrase that I use on pretty much every panel, and that is not in my term of office, or NIMTO. And many of us will have had that kind of experience. You're talking about 5 or 10 years' time. And if you're talking to a policymaker, you can see them thinking, well, I'm not going to hear by then. So I want something that's going to happen in 1 or 2 years. And we're seeing that in media, and we're seeing that in business as well. And that cannot help nature goals. The second thing is skills and training. If we don't have skills and training, we're not going to have a decent workforce that's fit for the future. And the third is diversity. We have to reflect the companies that we serve, and if we don't, we are going to become irrelevant. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I look forward to hearing more of that during our discussion. Tom, if I could move to you for a quick intro.
Thank you very much. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Crawford. So I'm a design engineer by origin, by training. I spent over 20 years in product development, manufacture, supply chains, and then commercial leadership before moving into sustainability. I established and led the sustainability function for Dyson, and now I lead it for the Vodafone Group. So Vodafone is for those who don't know, global telecommunications company, headquartered in UK, about 90,000 employees, over 300 million customers, primarily over Europe and Africa. And the three big priorities that I'm keen to talk about today from a climate perspective are both first, decarbonisation. So scope 1 and 2, where it's really about the requirement for reliable renewable energies in Africa for Vodafone, to complete our journey there. And then of course scope 3, where it's accelerating activity with partners on a very complex value chain. Secondarily, it's circular business models and accelerating those business models, both for the environmental benefit, but also then from a resilience and economic growth. And then finally, it's climate resilience and adaptation and kind of proactive mitigation plans there, both for our own business perspective, but also for our customers and the communities in which we operate. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. And Alicia.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the regulator. I get to do all the, I would argue, sometimes boring stuff around setting frameworks, making sure that they're implemented across the market. But really, what we do is we own the various topics around the broader FCA. So the FCA, for anybody who's familiar with us, we're about 5,000 people. We have so many different functions. We look across the whole of the financial services market in the UK. And what my department does is we think about how every single aspect of the wider organization has to think about climate risk, environmental risks, now defense, security, and resilience. But ultimately, we make sure that both the short term, so the supervision, what firms are doing right now, all of that is happening, but also actually a lot of work on the future, the strategy of the UK, what we think will make sense in 5, 10 years' time. So it's both the short term and the long term elements of it.
And that's the nub of a lot of the things we're talking about, is that combination. So we've had a chat beforehand and have a little bit of a discussion planned for about half an hour, and then we'll have a good 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'll let the audience start to think of some good questions that I can put to you. But Tom, maybe if we come to you first. Vodafone sees climate resilience and adaptation firsthand. Where are you seeing the biggest risks to operations and customers? How should businesses be preparing differently?
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So the ICC released a report not so long ago, which said that there had been about 4,000 extreme weather events in the last 10 years, costing $2 trillion and affecting 1.6 billion people's lives. And certainly telco community and industry is not immune. 2021, there was some huge floods in Germany, for example, which took out 13,000 of our fixed lines. So what's Vodafone doing? Well, we have a really systematic and proactive mitigation plan, but all underpinned on connectivity. So, and it's 4-step framework, really. It's predict, prepare, respond, and recover. So with regards to prediction, the telco community has an abundance of data which can really help to predict extreme weather events, be that on the ground temperature around all of our base stations, which can then support identifying wildfire propagation, or the data traffic going over our heads, where we have thousands of lines of data. We can look at the signal behavior. We can then infer that to rainfall, and we can get hyper-localized and really accurate rainfall to be able to predict floods. So in terms of then prepare, early warning systems, we're working with governments like in Mozambique in the cyclones of 2024 to push early warning messages, SMS and voice messages, that we know of people who are in the zone because we can geolocate where those devices are, and then respond. It's really working with governments on the emergency services, giving them priority for 5G networks so that they can communicate effectively, but also instant pop-up networks through our foundation charity to help communities. And then finally, recover. It's both about the speed of recovery. So those Germany floods, we had about 80% back online within 24 hours, but it's also the long-term resilience and design cycle to ensure that we're designing better and better every time, but also have the local communities through our foundation with long-term digital skills. So what can businesses do? Absolutely, businesses should have really sharp mitigation plans, both their own businesses, but their customers and communities. But also, what does government need to do? Government really needs to lean into the critical national infrastructure, prioritizing it and investing it, because as we know, these events are becoming much more commonplace.
Thank you, Tom. And Tom touched on resilience there, but also preparedness. And Alicia, I guess transition finance has a role to play in that. Is there anything you could add on that topic? And maybe also touching on adaptation. Obviously, a lot more on adaptation we're hearing about at the moment.
Yes. So, from the perspective of the FCA and the role of finance within both transition, adaptation, and broader resilience, the way we've always thought about it is, and this might be surprising to hear from a regulator, but we haven't been focused on, it's not our job to make sure that there's a lot of transition finance labeled products in the market. If you do put them out, we care that they are actually what they say on the tin. We have certain rules about that. But on transition finance, we've been thinking much more broadly, which is, can the transition be financed? And is the market integrity in place to enable different firms from across the whole economy to be able to raise the capital that they need to be able to fund that transition? And it's always been that sort of macro view for a few years now, from back when they were doing the transition finance market review across government. And what that really means in practice is we went out last year, so about a year ago, and started looking at whether or not there were barriers across the market in a practical sense to firms being able to raise that capital. So we called it the Transition Finance Pilot. It was launched about a year ago by the Chancellor in Mansion House. And we actually just published the findings about 2, 3 weeks ago. We've been quite quiet about it because we knew that London Climate Action Week was coming up and we'd be speaking about it more now. And we did also take quite a critical eye to ourselves in it. So we wanted to make sure that there were no unintended barriers within our own rules that were impacting on whether or not firms were able to raise this kind of capital. The good news for us is we didn't find anything that we needed to fundamentally shift, but as we went, we started to find things where there were frictions. And overall, and I'm going to become a British citizen on Monday, so I really care how the UK is
Congratulations.
doing now. Thank you. I care that this country is doing well. But one of the things that we did find is all of the right foundations are in place in the UK. We should count ourselves really, really lucky. We have deep pools of capital. We do have a lot of the broader capability. But there are some frictions in how some of those actually then come together. So in our report, we went through and we started to identify what those are, and we will be taking them forward as part of broader work. And we are going to be thinking about where we can help unlock that. In a nutshell, there is still an SME funding challenge within the space. If you're a very, very large company, for example, Vodafone or others, you usually have a very wide range of capital available to you. But if you're an SME, for a wide variety of reasons, which I'm happy to go into, there are challenges depending on whether or not you're getting debt or equity. And again, the good news is that there are a lot of initiatives in place that at the time of publication we knew were coming, but we're not at that point yet where we're seeing all of them crystallize and start to make those changes in the market. But we do remain quite hopeful that over the next 6 to 12 months, those will start coming out.
Brilliant. And it's good to have that whole economy view in terms of the research. Sarah, you touched on skills earlier, and I guess another whole economy view. But we're also in a time of cost pressure, and we're starting to see skills and training get squeezed. Why is that so disastrous? And what can you say around the need for skills and how we build them across the economy?
Well, we've heard from Tom and Alicia about some, from Tom's point of view, the preparedness, the stuff you need to do to make sure you're resilient. From Alicia, the knowledge you need to have, whether you're a big or small company around this stuff, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every single person who does a thing needs to be skilled in order to do it effectively and properly. And you're absolutely right. Everybody's feeling it. I run a small business as a professional institute. We're all feeling the pressure. But if you don't skill and train your workforce, you are leaving yourself open not only not to be able to take advantage of the latest technology and skills and knowledge, but also to not be a very interesting place where people want to come and stay. If you have colleagues under 30, they will want to know not just what you say you're going to do, but what you are actually doing. And they will walk away if they think you're not doing it. If you have a diverse workforce, it's the same thing. Unless you are actually doubling into your commitment to equality, to sustainability, and that also includes a commitment to lifelong learning and supporting people on their learning journey. I do think, the sustainability sector, we do have to hold our hands up, and we have sometimes not been our own best friends. We have talked in a lot of wonky nerd speak, alphabet soup. We don't really explain stuff. We don't explain to business leaders why it's important and relevant, not only to their bottom line, but to their medium and long term future. We've published recently with the Aldersgate Group a document to help exactly do that, to make the case for business and to tell the story why this is so important. But the answer is, we've already heard from Tom, this is not happening in 5 years' time, not part of your long term risk register. It's happening now. Anyone who came in the train where all the trains were down, it's happening now. Or who lives in Kent and doesn't have any water, it's happening now. And so we need to make sure that every business everywhere has the skills to deal with that and become more resilient.
Thank you, Sarah. One of the other topics we touched on as we were preparing was around the circular economy and increasing need for raw materials and volatile prices, demand changing, growing appetite for second life products. I think certainly in fashion retail, I think some of the biggest websites are now actually for pre-loved goods. Tom, can you tell us a little bit about the role of circularity in your business?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are two big macro factors at play. One is about the volatility of raw materials, and for example, for electronic industries, for component availability, and that's availability and price affected by supply demand. So we heard just now about data centers and AI, or data centers driven by AI are really consuming semiconductors, so memory chips and microprocessors, which is causing a shortage and putting prices up for the rest of the electronics world. But there's also obviously the geopolitical and trade tensions, which we're all very aware of as well. So there's a real supply chain kind of challenge there. But at the same time, on output, electronic waste, as cited by the UN, is one of the fastest growing waste forms. I think in 2014, it was 44 million tons globally that we produced. 2022 was 62 million tons, of which only 22% was officially recycled. 2030 is predicted to be 82 million tons, so doubling in 16 years, which is incredibly scary. But circularity has huge opportunities. The Vodafone Institute, which is an independent research house, produced a report last year which surveyed 5,000 customers across 5 European countries with regards to their intention for their next mobile device purchase. 40% of people said they intended to buy secondhand. But interestingly, of those who already had secondhand, 81% were intending to rebuy secondhand, which shows that demand is totally stable, mainstream, and growing. And then from a technology perspective, it's like super exciting time in terms of remanufacturing, refurbishment, and recycling. I was lucky enough to go to the Royal Mint last year, which for those who don't know is in the UK where we print money. They're now diversifying into e-waste recycling, taking all the commodities, selling them, but also extracting precious metals for their own use. They've got a chemical leaching process which extracts gold in 10 to 20 seconds off electronic boards. It's insane. So circularity is an amazing opportunity with regards to increasing our resilience to supply chain disruption, to commodity price volatility, but also it's driving economic growth with new products and services. And it's no longer just an environmental option. It's now absolutely a resilience and a competitive strategy.
So that's a compelling business case for circularity. I often hear people saying that there are challenges around financing. Alicia, how do we crowd more financing into circular initiatives?
I mean, that's a big question. I can maybe go into some of the things that we find in the broader financing challenges, because the caveat that you always have to give as the regulator is you are not here to direct financing into specific sectors or to make those decisions. We know that that is absolutely, that is the specialism of the industry. We are there to set the guardrail, so we always have to make sure we're absolutely clear on that. Um, However, in terms of some of the challenges that we do see, it very much depends. And this is where I think, actually, to something you were sort of alluding to earlier, there has been a really important maturing of the sustainability sort of narrative over the last few years. Because even when I started in it years ago, there was something around like, do it because it's the right thing to do. And you would get these sort of statements, but actually, that is commercially perhaps a little bit naive. And it didn't necessarily take into account the fact that this wasn't going to be linear. It was going to be difficult. There are going to be trade offs. We've been saying for quite a few years that we need to get into action. We're all still saying that, and we are seeing that progress. But actually, that maturing has been really important because we're starting to be more honest about what some of those trade offs are. In terms of the finance, it really depends on what type of finance you're talking about, because you can't just talk about finances, this broad sweeping, whoops, oh, thank you. This broad sweeping, all the sectors are the same, thank you, and what they are looking for. Insurers are looking for something different than private equity firms. It has to be sort of seen through the really full financing lens. And what we do find is that, for example, with some of the SMEs trying to get into this space, and especially in the climate space, and this is not the official FCA view, this is the way I would categorize it. There's a lot of values driven business ideas. They have to be commercial. They have to be commercial before they actually are able to get the funding. And it doesn't matter if you're being propped up by concessional capital, if you're getting that support, there still has to be a fundamental commercial product if you are going down the private sector route. If you are going down the you need to get debt, then if you're an SME, that is a challenge because you are relying on backwards looking credit risk assessments. So if you're a new SME that is trying to do something new, then you do have to reach out, and you can very often go to the public finance institutes. So for anybody who's not familiar with that, that includes the British Business Bank, that includes the National Wealth Fund. There's accelerators. There's so many different initiatives in the UK, but they can be difficult to navigate. That was one of our findings. So the Treasury is now thinking about I think they're calling it a no wrong door policy. So if you are an SME, if you are looking to get some of this funding and this support, that it doesn't matter which of them you go to. If it's not the right one, they will point you to the correct one. The other thing that we did in our work in the Transition Finance Pilot publication is we've actually tried to give almost like a list of these are the resources SMEs should be going to try to be able to get to the right parts of all of these initiatives. because we would get these statements from people where they would say, well, SMEs should contact government. And I remember at one point thinking, there's no hotline. Like, how do you reach government? That's such a broad statement. So we did a bit of digging, and if it's hard for the regulator to find, it meant that legitimately those SMEs who were focused on trying to become commercial were struggling to navigate some parts of that sector. But again, we tried to sort of consolidate it into, this is what we mean by going to government. These are the groups that are available to you. These are the initiatives that are available. And now, and you may hear this at different events throughout this week, the Green Finance Institute has launched the Green Finance Lab, the Transition Finance Lab. And that is also there to support these firms that are going out and trying to do these new initiatives. And very often that's because if you are doing either the asset or whatever it is that you're trying to get financed is new, but then also the financing structure is new, that tends to be quite a barrier to get a first of its kind thing done. And the Transition Finance Lab will be there to support firms. So what we've done is we've given them all of our evidence, everything that we found, to help them shape it into something that is legitimately helpful for the market. So it's initiatives like that, and it's doing all the practical side of things around these great ideas that we have that I think is going to be critical in the next year.
Sarah, you look like you wanted to comment. I was going to ask you about how we persuade people to reduce as well as do new things, but you look like you wanted to comment on this topic as well.
Yes, I mean, I'm so glad to hear that about the Treasury just making it easy. I was at a parallel thing on a round table a couple of years ago for the National Heritage Lottery Fund, who were giving Nature Forward, Resilient money, because they are one of the few people who still have got a reasonable amount to give. And the small companies and small charities were saying, well, this is great, but we don't have the capacity to access this. There's 7 people and all of them are really, really busy. And somebody from the fund said, well, okay, we could give you some money so you could apply to us. And they said, well, that is still not the point because it takes 3 months to employ anybody. What we need is resource. We need to be able to pick up the phone, have someone who knows what they're talking about. But your point about reduce, I think this is sustainability superpower because and that's the thing that actually cuts through a lot of the companies. So we work with massive companies, we work with micro businesses, as well as 21,000 individual members around the world. Um, but the thing that cuts through is saving money. You save money directly off. It comes off your bottom line. It is absolutely good business sense to switch all the lights off at night, or to have things that are invest in stuff that actually will give you a real benefit. And we've all seen the way that energy prices have just been completely mad over the last 6 or 7 years, up and down. And how do you ensure that you've got consistency? Using less stuff means you save money for things you really want to spend it on as a business. And just being able to slightly change the rhetoric, again, to this point about sustainability being seen as a bit of a luxury pursuit, to your point, that it's all a bit kind of, well, if only you did this and if only you did that. Well, if only you save money. Let's just stop talking about carbon and saying you can save money, you can increase investment on what you want to spend it on, and you can also save some carbon at the same time.
Brilliant. Easy.
Easy, yes. That's it. Finish. All sorted.
So we'll come to questions in a couple of minutes, and we've got a final round of pre-canned questions to the panel. But maybe if we keep the answers a little bit shorter this time round. But Tom, to kick us off, in some markets, the transition's constrained by off-grid energy challenges and other practical issues. What do those barriers tell us about the gap between ambition and implementation on the ground?
Yeah, thanks. So Vodafone's mission is to connect everybody for a better future. There are 2.9 billion people who are unconnected in the world, majority in the global south. And at the same time, there's complete uneven renewable energy penetration, much more in the global north and the global south. So compound problem. And of course, there's technologies out there off the shelf, like solar, like wind and batteries, which we're deploying, but have limitations, space, capex, theft, vandalism. There are other technologies, but which aren't appropriate, like hydrogen. There's just from upfront capex and also infrastructure. And then we've developed some of our own technologies, like digital platforms called virtual wheeling, which helps energy companies to ingest from individual providers and then aggregate that for wholesale sort of output. But even with all of that, it's still not enough. We've reduced our emissions on scope 1 to 85% since baseline year. Our final emissions is removing diesel from our Africa grids. So what do we need to do? Fundamentally, governments need to lean in with policy and market structures to accelerate the investment. Businesses need to share innovation and sharing solutions and innovate together. And then financiers need to help to de-risk investment in, for example, Africa, to be able to then accelerate the adoption and the rollout of renewables.
Brilliant. Alicia, what's the role of regulation in supporting that? Are there tools you're rolling out?
So yes, I like to joke that I'm a very lazy regulator because it's actually an insanely huge amount of work to put policy out. It's a very, very long process as well, typically. But what we like to do is we have an incredible convening power. Most firms within financial services have to talk to us, which means that if we want to bring them together for certain conversations, I find that they're really, really lovely about it. But actually, us being able to convene those financial services firms also really helps us understand both the challenges that exist, can help drive market initiatives. So we co-convene with the Bank of England, the Climate Financial Risk Forum, which has been going for many years now. They put out it's by industry for industry. They put out tools that are actually helpful for industry. For example, there's ones on adaptation. There's ones around transition finance KPIs. They do really, really great work. And all we have to do is be present, and the industry does this great work for themselves. And they also tell us the tools and the challenges that they're coming up against. We have just a wide variety of other things that we can do. A really good example is, because this is actually a new announcement as of today, I'm allowed to say it publicly. We have brought an innovative firm called Trex into our sandbox, which is looking at climate scenarios. Because one of the things for the geeks around the room that I know has been a big topic of discussion has been whether or not the climate scenarios that financial services uses, are they actually sufficiently capturing both the first order but then also the second order impacts so that we can really understand what the impacts of climate change are going to be. So what we've done is we've brought in this company that is at the forefront of that into our sandbox. They're going to test, we're going to facilitate that, and they can do something innovative to help give a tool into the market that is not necessarily one that we can independently build, but we know is useful for the broader market. So we do a lot of that where we bring people together, we try to figure out what those tools are, what those challenges are. And we also do a lot internationally, which tends not to be as seen, but it's a major part of our work, actually.
Brilliant. Amazing convening. And you talked a lot about bringing people together there. And maybe I'll turn to Sarah in terms of bringing this discussion together, in terms of we've touched on risk, finance, uh, credibility, implementation challenges. How can businesses stay true to their principles, to their mandate, to their purpose when they're under constant pressure to prioritize short term?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, not just businesses, governments as well, as we've seen in the UK over the last few days. There is always a need. There is always a social media feed. I think there are two things. First of all, comms is another thing, along with skills and training that tends to get. Oh well, we'll just get rid of that. You need permanent comms these days. You can't just send out a press release and expect everybody to watch it. You need permanent comms from the people who are working with you to tell your story. That's number one. That's how you manage it, and that's how you get impact, not just within your organization, but outside as well. But also, we work with a lot of companies, and I have the privilege of talking to a lot of people as a result of this job. I don't know anyone who wants to do a bad thing in business. They're not sitting there with a cap in a big chair going, ha ha ha, you're tomorrow of the world. What they want to do is do good stuff. And concentrating on that, making sure that good stuff means a resilient organization that will deliver value for shareholders, but will also deliver value to customers and to your organization as well. Having those as your principle, we've all got that in our strategic priorities. I'm sure there's something around effectively doing good. Well, what does that actually mean? And sometimes that is painful, but in the long term, it will bring benefit. So just being able to tell that story. Just one very quickly, storytelling. We do a how-to series for our early career graduates and professionals with all these professional skills like communication. Storytelling is the most popular because we all need to be able to tell a story. And it's not just graduates who are watching that on repeat, it's all the way through the profession. So tell the story well and make it land and make sure that your business is doing good in the widest sense of the word.
I couldn't agree more. I think storytelling is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. Now, we started this panel a little bit late, and Sarah, I know you need to leave just after 10. I think we've got about 10 minutes for some questions from the audience. Some hands have gone up. I'm not sure how we're getting. So there's a lady in the third row, uh, and there's somebody on the side over here. Have we got a microphone on its way? And we got one over there. Who's got the microphone? Where's my? So yeah. Oh, we're going to start on the side. Maybe tell us who you are and question for the audience. It's not on.
I'm not sure. Oh, there you go.
there we
Perfect.
go.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. It was very, very interesting and insightful. My name is Tanya. I'm from the company called Innova. We are operating in energy optimization space. I have a question for Tom. I was very impressed with your efforts in the international level as well as your circularity efforts in the company. Sorry, can you hear me well? Shall I speak louder?
Speak louder.
Louder. Right.
Yeah.
How about that? Okay. Yeah, I have a question for Tom. Thank you so much for everything you do globally with Vodafone as well as your efforts in circularity space. I do have a question closer to home in the UK, and Vodafone has about, I believe, over 20,000 masts in this country, and each has or should have a little backup battery, right, as a backup capacity. And somehow this backup capacity is not used for grid resilience in the UK, which would contribute to UK's lower energy prices, decarbonization goals, net zero, etc., etc. I'm wondering if you guys are looking into this at all and whether this is at all in your agenda. Thank you.
Brilliant. If you could pass the microphone that way, Tom, can you give us a go while
Yeah, thanks very much.
we get the microphone to the next person?
Thank you, and great question. I think so. I was chatting to Steve Smith, who's National Grid. He was on the stage just before us, actually, and we our conversation, which I will share here, is the big utility, if you want, companies should be working together more so. We are absolutely interdependent. The energy industry can't operate without telco, and telco can't operate without energy. And what we shouldn't be doing is kind of duplicating efforts. We should be coming together. And that's a conversation that we're having at our level and driving our teams towards. And also then with the capability of AI layered on top of that. So we're all using AI in really novel ways and effective ways. Steve talked some about them online earlier, and we use it within our battery management systems as well. So great question. And yes, it is something which is a priority.
If I may, that is a really good example of how business needs to operate differently given a very different set of circumstances. It's not just a kind of Shark Tank winner takes all, because we can't afford to do that from a resilience point of view. And that's working across industry, up and down and through supply chains as well. It's not just whoever's the lowest bidder, it's who you can work in partnership with for a resilient outcome.
Brilliant. Just on the AI point, we launched a AI and decarbonisation report in the autumn, which was exactly that point in terms of the question, is AI part of the solution or the problem? And the thesis there was part of the solution in managing our resources better. We had a question in the third row.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the panel as well. And I'm really glad to be hearing not just from the perspective of a big corporate, but you all sort of touching upon SMEs as well. So I'm a senior operator of an SME, an AI tech startup in London, and my question is around like, does it make sense for us to start thinking about sustainability and to bake that into our work as well? Because obviously our day to day is very much sitting in front of a computer in a shared workspace, using sort of AI tools. It feels like sustainability and impact and all of those things are very far away from us. We're not necessarily within the sustainability industry as well. We're in voice AI, sort of content creation as well. So yeah, the question is whether or not it makes sense for us to start thinking. We're a 20 people team as well, thinking about sustainability, given sort of the early stages that we're in, and how do we go about it? Thank you very much.
Alyssa, do you want to?
So maybe I
Kick
can
off.
start and then how to go about it if you guys want to jump in. So, in my experience and observation, the sooner firms start integrating this, so it's not this standalone thing that is sitting on the side and it's something we're going to think about separately, or there's even in a large corporate, a separate department. The more you can integrate it in, the easier it becomes. And then it also tends to become a much bigger part of the strategy and the fibers of the organization that you're building and growing. Because that's a challenge for companies that are much more established as how to bring it in. But if you're sort of starting from the ground up, and you're in that SME stage, it's going to be much easier the sooner you do it. And you can always iterate. I think we all iterate, and the way in which we did it years ago is definitely different than the way we do it now. But it's always easier to build with it in mind than plunk it on after. And I think I don't know if you guys have views on ways to do it well.
Sarah?
Please do connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm very happy to have a conversation because, yes, do you want to save money? Do you want to make sure that you're attractive to a highly talented workforce? Then, if the answer to both of those is yes, then yes, you need to think about sustainability. But I'm very happy to have a talk afterwards.
I'd also just add in to say bake it in from the beginning because it is a competitive differentiator. And depending on how your startup grows, good luck. But if you get to like government contracts, the Public Procurement Act has a minimum of a 10% allocation weighting in tenders towards sustainability ESG. Therefore, depending on how you grow, it's just important to get on that sort of journey right at the outset and to recognize the frameworks that you're competing in as an entity.
So we've got a question over on the side. I think
Thank
it
you.
might.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Guy Thompson. I'm on the board of the Aldersgate Group. Hi. Great discussion. Thank you, panel. It's definitely the conversation we should all be having. My question is about whether we're getting the incentives right for business. In the UK context, we've got these legally binding targets for the transition to net zero and nature recovery, and yet there's this constantly running dialogue now about growth and environmental ambition somehow being in tension with one another. So we're clearly not getting something right. Alicia, you spoke about the role of financial regulation in this space, but I wonder if the panel can open that up to talk about the role of quality regulation in setting, raising standards, building capacity, and creating the demand for the shift to the transition we all want to see. Whether we're getting that right.
Maybe I to give a starter for 10. So I was in a conversation yesterday within the telco community, but also with regards to the greenhouse gas protocols, for example, which changing for scope 2, and they're looking to, of the multiple changes, they're looking to change how we account for renewable energy from a consumer's perspective, from annual accounting to hourly accounting. So like making sure that the energy that is consumed is matched with renewable energy at an hourly rate. I mean, that is like, the bar has just gone miles high. And I don't disagree with the ambition. From a practicality of implementation, this is going to be really, really, really hard. So we need to have a really structured framework to get to that ambition, of which they've introduced with phasing, etc. So I think, for taking that as an example, I think the ambition, and that's obviously then unified across industry, right, as a standard. I think it is taking us in the right direction, but it just, notwithstanding how difficult it's going to be to actually get there, and the support that's going to be required. across the entire ecosystem to be able to then achieve that standard.
Does anyone else want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Great question as always. I would take it, no pun intended, a bit upstream, actually. The reason we get the policy we get is that politicians and policymakers are reacting to what the public is saying. And I think as a sustainability sector, as I said, we've allowed people of immense privilege to suck up all the oxygen in this space and, be obsessive about some quite niche stuff. So we're really good at atomizing ourselves. If you get 10 environmentalists together, there's always someone who's going to say, yeah, but I care about that otter or that butterfly. We need to have 3 things that we can all agree on and then just relentlessly pursue those with public, with policymakers. I think then you will begin to see the narrative changing.
It's quite interesting because I think there's a big piece on narrative we all could do better on. I mean, it was part of the idea behind the title we have today of reframing. Let's reframe the debate. I was at a United for Wildlife event yesterday, and I think the catchphrase there was "green is the new gold." But also thinking about actually doing a better job of storytelling. The CBI report last year, in terms of the number of green jobs, I think it's nearly 1 million green jobs in the UK economy, and the level of gross value added. Now, you can drill into how you come up with those numbers, but I think sometimes some of those big numbers get lost among some of the headlines. Now, I think we've got time for one more question, but I can't with the line. Oh, there's one here. Excellent. And you have the mic.
Thank you. Thanks for a great session. Can you hear me okay?
Go loud.
A bit louder. Okay. I've just launched a consultancy that focuses on growth and resilience. So, right in the space that we're talking about. And I think, in particular, with a focus on raw materials. I mean, the EU publishes an annual list of critical raw materials, and most of the periodic tables been on red alert for the last 5-6 years. Do you think companies are now beginning to develop a more systems approach to growth and resilience? And are we seeing more cross-functional teams coming together to solve this problem?
Does anyone want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll happily kick off. So, yes, I think there is a more systems approach because companies are recognizing, and well, I speak from within my sphere of like visibility of like telco and Dyson before that, but it's a competitive differentiator. And if you look at the marketplaces, as Rich was saying, like back market, Vinted, they're some of the fastest growing businesses. It's absolutely insane. I think so. It's driving the consumer behavior is driving the demand. The businesses are trying to step up to the demand. There's technologies that are coming forward to make that ever more capable. And there's a recognition that actually it's both mitigation that you need to be in the game, otherwise you're going to lose out. But it's also about proactive opportunity that you can either be lagging, fast following, or you can leave, right? So and I think the EU regulations, for example, really does well to accelerate that. I think, though, we do still have a challenge internationally and beyond borders, and there's a sovereignty drive, which then makes countries or regions look to be more robust, but then perhaps also introduces challenges about cross-border trading.
Anyone else want to add? Now, we started a little late, and I know Sarah has to go and see a minister. So, in the interest of the ministerial engagement, we'll move to our panelists giving a final couple of minutes of thoughts. We'll start with Sarah, who I think may need to sneak away. But maybe if you could give us some final concluding thoughts.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for bringing us together. And thank you to colleagues for a really interesting discussion. Fantastic questions as well. And it's interesting, though, isn't it? It's the same old things. It's a single point of truth in terms of data that we're not sharing effectively. It's skills and training that businesses are understandably not investing as they should do because everything's more short term. But it's the imperative that is now beginning to bleed through global economies, every single sector, food and farming, retailers, You talk to supermarkets, they absolutely get this because, have you seen the price of chocolate recently? With telecoms, with energy, with all utilities now, we are at a stage where this isn't going to happen in 5 years' time. So the question is, how do we work together more effectively to get the outcomes that we need? And I think that is another 2 hour platform, presume I would have thought. But thank you. And I've certainly thought, because there's a lot of thoughts going around my head about how we can communicate more effectively as a result of this panel. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I love the fact you mentioned the price of chocolate. I had a debate with someone on, well, coffee was the one I was going to mention, of what happens if we no longer have coffee and potentially riots on the street was the allegation there. Tom, a final thought.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, and actually, it comes to a point that Alicia was making with regards to where we almost started our journey. And similarly, in terms of there's a lot of enthusiastic sign up and a lot of targets put out there, but with perhaps without the sort of focus to attention on how it was going to be achieved. Phase like early era, then we went to a highly regulated space, which was needed. Pendulum has swung a long way, omnibus bringing it back a bit. But now I think we're going into a new, exciting era where it's a recognition that sustainability is obviously required from an environmental perspective, but it's also fundamentally a resilience and an economic growth driver. And actually, that I think is a really exciting phase where where there is speaking the business language is not woke, it's not regulation, it's just like business language, but which is basically back to the triple bottom line, which is good for people, good for planet, good for business and profit.
Brilliant. Alicia,
So I will just share a quick one, which is I think it would be really amazing if we're
you
able.
may need to share it a bit more because there's another announcement.
Oh, is there another announcement? My voice carries. I can go louder. So I would say the big one from my side would be let's save time on things like resilience and energy security, and let's have the harder conversations up front, and let's not shy away from them, because I think that was one of the challenges that we had in the sustainability space. So there is definitely something about that, because the way we sort of always frame it to ourselves is what you do when you're popular has to stand up when you're unpopular. And because some of these topics are shifting, and the currents and the geopolitics, it is all quite complicated. The more we actually dive into the detail of why it matters and we're honest about some of this stuff, I think we'll get a lot further.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the challenges in this space is these are multi-year programs. And it's how do you keep that North Star going over a period of time? But importantly, it's this question of how we tell the right story and actually refocus where are the outcomes of those programs on resilience, on adapting to a changing world and a changing planet. And importantly, to actually shift the narrative to actually what is the bottom line impact that these programs have. And I stood on this stage, or sat on this stage last year, and I said, the business leaders who embrace that challenge, I think will be the ones leading businesses that are successful in 3, 4, or 5 years' time. Not just the ones that have a rush over 12 months, but then start to see some of the problems emerge. And I do think more broadly, we need to look at how we balance that short-term quarterly reporting driven challenge with actually how do we take those long-term resilience investment led decisions. And I think that gives us a chance to realize transformational value. So I think as we close, one of my challenges for organizations is to take stock of existing programs, assess where you are on the transition, on the adaptation, on that resilience journey, to look through to that triple bottom line in terms of where are they delivering value, what needs to stop, what needs to be tweaked, what needs to be driven through, and really to have that value-driven conversation. And we heard earlier this year the UK Climate Change Committee's report on adaptation, I thought was very important in terms of actually thinking through that question of adaptation is going to be really important, not only to thrive, but also to survive in a shifting landscape. So I think that's going to be one of the really key areas that needs to be addressed and embraced as we go forward. So, as we lead to a close, a thank you to our panelists, to Sarah, who's left us already, to Tom, to Alicia. As I close out today, KPMG are headline sponsors at Reset Connect today. We're involved in another 3 panels from the main stages. We've also got a number of workshops that we're running upstairs through this afternoon and throughout tomorrow. And you can find out more about those events on the Reset Connect app. And yesterday, we launched our report called Reframing Sustainability, Building Resilience. And the QR code, which is on the screen, well, should be on the screen, will take you to that report. So if I could just wish you all a very good Reset Connect experience. And I'll be around over the next 2 days if you want to catch me and ask any more questions. So thank you.